Okay, so all the topics are now open, and we're just having a discussion about the structuring of the course as far as when graduation is. So graduation will hopefully be around December for those that started at the start of the year, and it's good just to keep that momentum going and not let too many other things bury the course. Otherwise you lose momentum and it's hard to re-engage. So it's good to keep going and try to submit in December if you can, if you joined at the start of the year. So all the topics are now open, and we're just discussing about which ones are the core ones and which ones are more optional. So the core ones, and I'll reorganize this to make it a bit clearer, but the design portfolio is the topic that helps review how to structure your submission. So all the different aspects of that, and it's got some links in there to support you in doing that, as well as some good examples. So you can look at those examples to help guide your own submission. And then the core topic, so permaculture designs, the whole philosophy of permaculture design and how to apply it. Site analysis is how you understand the dynamics of your site. And then you've got site analysis, site dynamics, some of the things like water, topography, and what was the other one? Microclimates. So once you get a bit of an understanding of your site, these are more specific kind of elements about your site. And then social permaculture is how to bring in those social elements to support your design, and building soil is a topic that tends to link into all the other topics, because ideally you'll be applying the philosophy of permaculture design to create healthy soil through creating these different types of systems. So they're your core topics, and I'll reorganize this just to make it a bit clearer. But with those core topics, you've got the philosophy and the application of permaculture design, and then using that, you can then start to apply it to these different contexts. So building a home perhaps, or an aquaponic system, or a garden, or an orchard, or a grazing system, or restoring a natural area. So these are all the different applications of that philosophy of permaculture design. And those other ones are more optional topics depending on their relevance to your site. So you might only have an aquaponic system. You might be setting up a classroom demonstration site, for example, and you really wanted to just create an aquaponic system to demonstrate the application of permaculture philosophy, which is fine. You know, that the whole course is about trying to understand what permaculture is, being able to understand the particular dynamics of the site in which you want to apply that philosophy to, and then through your design to be able to demonstrate how it represents your understanding of permaculture to meet the requirements of the specific elements of your site. So when you come to do your final design, that's what you should be really thinking about, is how does my design express my understanding of permaculture design philosophy, the specific dynamics of my site, and bring those together into a functional design. And some of the key elements in that is a functional diversity of elements. So different, so you've identified in your site different production systems, and you've tried to create some diversity in those systems, and you've also tried to create some beneficial interactions between them. And one simple way of expressing that is trying to fulfill each requirement on a site. So if it's water, power, food, could be meat, could be vegetables, it could be fruit. So trying to meet each one of those requirements through 3 different elements. And then each one of those elements trying to create 3 beneficial connections with the other elements of your design. So that's a way of kind of just structuring in your thinking how to create that functional diversity. And then that having each resource met by 3 different elements creates some resiliency in your design, so that if it's power, for example, and you got a hydroelectric, you got mains, and you got solar, depending on the variability of life and whatever goes on, you've got some backup there. Or if you're completely off grid, you might want to have a diesel generator and solar power, and maybe an electric battery or something like that. And you've got different ways to store and generate electricity from those different elements. So that's kind of like bringing that philosophy of permaculture design into your system. And then when you put your portfolio together, the idea is that you don't, I find if people just have one concept sketch and then one final design, they haven't really explored the full range of possibilities of permaculture design, and they tend to just bring in their prior thinking into just creating a new system, and they haven't really fully explored how to integrate permaculture thinking into creating a more diverse and interconnected system. So that's why I like to challenge people by creating 3 concept sketches, is that hopefully when you come to do your final design, with all those different ideas there, you can really start thinking about how to create beneficial interactions between those different possibilities that you've explored. And then by just spending a bit longer to think about how to create those connections and the full range of possibilities for your site, hopefully that will help get you to a point of a more functional design, because you've spent a bit longer exploring some different possibilities.
I have a question, Richard, or 2 questions actually. The one is, when you're talking about the 3 elements, and I think you mentioned, for example, hydro, solar, and something else, maybe
mains electricity.
Yes, mains. So there are actually 3 elements there, and we're looking at 3 aspects from sort of the permaculture philosophy point of view, for people share and what is it, for people, for planet, and for fair share. I can't remember the exact wording. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Not really.
Fair share, people care, and earth care. So
yes,
that
yes.
The outcome of a permaculture design should meet those that outcome.
So in effect, we're looking at 2 different groups of 3 elements. One is what we're actually working with, and for example, it might be mains, and then we have additional solar, and then we have a generator as backup, and then we need to discuss how that system of those 3 elements integrated with everything else is affecting earth care, people care, and fair share. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the beauty of permaculture is it is quite complex in how it seeks to address solutions to things, because one thing I've discovered in exploring regenerative agriculture through my thesis is people tend to come up with alternative solutions to permaculture, but it doesn't quite express that breadth of design possibilities and emphasize the design thinking approach to coming up with solutions to things. So that's what always kind of draws me back to permaculture, as being quite a nice approach to coming up with some of these solutions to sustainable living. But initially it was earth care, people care, and fair share as the guiding philosophy of when you do a permaculture design, that would be the outcomes that you would get. That you can share the surplus of food, you're protecting the environment, and that people are looked after through the production in that system. So that's like a guiding philosophy of the outcomes that you're trying to seek. But the outcomes that you're trying to seek doesn't explain how you're going to get those outcomes. So the permaculture principles are the actions that you would take to get those outcomes.
Right.
And in the course, we kind of looked at what is your values, what are your mission, and your
Yes.
So trying to get a sense of, for yourself, what do you value in life, and what are your vision and your mission and your values that would guide that. And looking at the principles of permaculture design, how can you start kind of immersing yourself into that world and kind of coming up with your own principles in a way to express in your context what actions can you take to start getting these more sustainable outcomes. Because it can be, while the permaculture principles are great, it can be hard when you're starting the journey to quite encapsulate all of those principles into the actions that you take. So it's more realistic to be guided by those principles, but then think about, in your context, what is your situation and your values and your context, and how can you be guided by those permaculture principles to take your own principles of actions to get the outcomes you want.
Right, that makes sense. Taking a step back and looking at that, yes. And then the other question is, when you talk about 3 different concept designs, can we include maybe a design that we might have gone into this project with? You know, say in February, we had a thought of approaching things a certain way, and along the way it's become more and more and more refined, and maybe we've even chucked that initial design out and gone, that, you know, doesn't meet the certain requirements, or we've learned more as we've lived on the land, or whatever the factor is. I mean, can one of those early designs be included, or are you really looking for concept designs kind of well deep into the course at this point?
Well, it's up to you. I mean, again, at the end, it's just about how you express permaculture thinking, and you've expressed your understanding of your site dynamics, and you've incorporated that into your functional design. So that's more the criteria, and how you do it is up to you. But the reality often is that, you know, we've got some history with a site, and we've got some history of knowledge, and that ideally would form the kind of the analysis. So that site analysis can be extended to your analysis of self, and your analysis of your history, of your interaction on the site, and even the impacts on that site before you engaged in it. So all of that can be part of the analysis that can then inform the next stage of your development, which would then be the permaculture design. So ideally it would be what's happening next. So it's your plans for the future. And then that would be something that would be malleable as you're moving forward. You know, you'd have stage 3, stage 4, stage 5. So you'd revisit your permaculture design and adapt it to your new understanding, your new context, your new development. So it's like a working plan for your next stage of development. That would be like the goal of what a permaculture design would be, and it would, and it's a bit of a discipline too, to help structure your thinking around creating plans for actions, rather than just be reactive to what's happening on your site and just do things to kind of keep the status quo and keep things productive. Is trying to think ahead as to how to do things better, and how to use some of your new understanding to explore new possibilities of making things better. And sometimes it's only just, you know, you got to maintain the status quo, but you can create new experiments for investigating new possibilities. So your permaculture design might be, okay, this is how things are at the moment, but these are some new experiments that I want to set up to explore new possibilities to shift things in new directions, which would be particularly applicable to a productive farmer who needs to maintain their production and their outcome, but they're wanting to explore how to shift things more sustainably, but they can't do it all at once, so they can just do things more experimentally.
Sure, as in sort of pilot studies.
Yeah,
that's helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions? Cool. Well, good questions, Debbie. Thank you for that. It really helps clarify some of these thoughts around here. So we've gone through all these core topics now. So we've you know, some of you will be at different stages, but before getting into these kind of optional topics of how to apply permaculture design, it's really good to spend your time to explore those core topics first, to make sure you've got a good understanding of what permaculture design is. Otherwise, you tend to just kind of gravitate to what you already know and interpreting things through that lens. Because I guess the ultimate outcome of a permaculture design certificate is you've got a new way of seeing the world, which is often called a permaculture lens. But the only way to develop that is to explore those core topics of how to understand permaculture design and its application. And then you start seeing all these new possibilities and creating systems and designing things and creating different outcomes in your landscape and your life and your businesses and relationships, and all these things kind of all flow out from evolving this new way of looking at the world. Ideally, anyway, you know, hopefully all education kind of expands your horizons to allow you to see new possibilities. The new topics that we're up to this time is holistic grazing and natural habitat. So the last two was the garden and the orchard, and hopefully you've got some concept sketches now to see how to start bringing some of that permaculture philosophy into creating those types of systems. And we're expanding that into the holistic grazing one. So holistic grazing looks at more of a broadacre zone 3 production. So we talked last time about intensity to do with zones, how zone 1's quite intense. It's your annual garden system, and it's quite structured environment around the house that is very highly impacted by your activities, with a very high energy input and a higher output of produce as a consequence of that. And as you're moving further away from that in zone 2, 3, 4, you're trying to rely more on natural functions and dynamics to support production. So it's more about trying to get systems connected together so that resources are recycled to support continuous production, rather than having to input in lots of resources to sustain production. So the Broadacre farm is zone 3, so it's quite expansive agriculture now, which is quite typical of New Zealand agriculture. You know, we're used to the rolling hills of pasture and cows and sheep and stuff like that. So that's what zone 3 is. And it's trying to think about how to apply permaculture design to that context. So there's 3 topics there. There's one about the design of a broadacre farm. There's one exploring some of the biology of grazers and trying to get an understanding about their origin and their evolution and their needs within the landscape, and how to, within the design that you create, try to create an optimal habitat for them that is going to create a good level of production through creating a nice environment for them to be in. And then pasture management is the other big element of that system, is how can you manage their grazing of that pasture? How can you diversify the production, diversify the pasture species to help create a nice balanced grassland ecosystem? If I go into the first topic, broadacre farm, got general topics there of a broadacre farm and rotational grazing, and some of the dynamics of applying that to New Zealand. Silver pasture farming is a big part of that. It's incorporating trees into pasture. So there's a whole nother page with some readings about that. Cell grazing is trying to bunch the livestock so that it mimics how grazers move in grassland systems. So they're often bunched together for protection, and they're being harassed by these predators that are always chasing them and keeping them bunched up. So they tend to use that as a defensive mechanism, but also to find new fresh pastures, because they're so concentrated, they've always got to keep moving. So Alan Savory was one of the first to look at that kind of natural behaviors of live grazers and replicate that within how you manage it within a grassland system. So since then it's been developed further, but the idea is that you concentrate the livestock by using mobile electric fencing, and you keep them at a high density, and then you move them through the grassland to fresh pastures daily. So every day you move them, and then you allow the pastures to grow up quite high before you allow it to be grazed. And the idea behind that is that the pastures, well, a lot of the carbon drawdown into the soil and a lot of the health of the soil depends on a good thriving pasture to pump all those exudates into the soil to support the soil biology. So if the pastures are really short, there's not much opportunity for that to happen, because you need the length of the grass to photosynthesize effectively to produce those exudates to support the soil life. And it also shades the soil to protect it from the drying up and the radiation from the sun. So there's a lot of different benefits to maintaining the taller pasture, but when the grazers come through, they then convert a lot of that to manures, and then they trample a lot of it. So you get the quick turnover of the grass to manure, and then the rest of the grass is all trampled down as like a mulch on the top of the soil. And that's a nice conversion of that plant biomass into other types of organic matter that will help build up the soil. and then that grass is left to recover nicely before it's grazed again. So it's not continuously grazed like what you see happening in a lot of New Zealand. It's given a long recovery time before it's grazed again. So that's the idea of the management of those pastures. And then with the silver pasture, it's looking at how to incorporate trees and make use of the functional trees to allow a better function and productivity on the farm. And there's lots of different benefits to that too. You can think of different types of production trees or fodder trees to provide additional food for animals, but also habitat for wildlife, because one thing that's quite striking in New Zealand is that the agricultural landscapes we have are very foreign to natural habitats and natural biodiversity. So they've got very low native biodiversity in farmland. And the one way to kind of restore some of the habitat for native biodiversity is through tree crops, and thinking about how you can expand on natural habitats through silver pasture systems to provide more refuges for native biodiversity, but also allow them corridors to be able to connect between different reservoirs of more expansive native habitat. So for example, you might have a bush block on your property, and you might have a wetland, and then you've got all this pasture in between. So the silver pasture might be a couple of rows of native trees to allow them to move between those different blocks of native habitat.
I'm just looking out at a perfect example of how not to do all those things. My neighbour used to have this nice edge around the paddock with like native regrowth on it, and they just completely annihilated the whole lot and pushed everything out like 20 centimeters to get a bit more grass. Yeah. And the grass is just absolutely mown to nothing. I don't know how the animals survive on there. Yeah. But I actually had a question, sorry to interrupt, but about the water supply when you're talking about moving animals frequently and having small areas. Do you have any information there about how to provide when you're doing that?
Yeah, there's a company outside Bulls. I'd have to look it up. I'll look it up and add it to the post of this recording. But they specialize in the infrastructure to support cell grazing. So they've got all the mobile electric fences, but also the irrigation pipes. So they, most farms have, their troughs and their main water irrigation to those troughs. So these are connection pipes that run off those main irrigation channels, and it's like a mobile trough on an irrigation pipe that you just plug into those irrigation lines that you run off the main irrigation lines. So when you're looking at a pasture, you kind of got to think strategically about how to run an irrigation line through that pasture and bury that, and then have points where you can plug in that mobile water trough, so that as you move the electric fencing along, you can pull out that water trough and plug it into the next point in that irrigation lines. Oh, yeah. So that they've kind of thought through all that, and they've got some nice things that you can buy to support that type of grazing.
It's probably bigger scale than my little block. Sounds quite intensive to set up.
Yeah.
I wonder what the minimum size would be for a land to make it worthwhile.
Well, I mean, they're just irrigation line and plug-in troughs, so it is pretty scalable, I think. You know, it's the irrigation line. I've got plenty of irrigation line just in my little backyard, so it's I don't. It just the bigger the area, the more cost associated with running irrigation out, I think. But I mean, you can do it naturally too. You can create ponds and swale systems. You might have a swale system with a ditch and a berm, and in that ditch have some more permanent water that the stock can drink from.
Yeah, I think there's legal requirements though, aren't there, that you have to provide a certain amount of water per day per animal.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what they are, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. But yeah, I mean, I'd just explore using those irrigation lines and the plug-in trough
I'd be
and
interested.
just move that around, because yeah, it's not that expensive, and it's only more expensive when you scale it up.
Yeah. Okay, I'll look at that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and I guess one of the additional challenges we have with permaculture in New Zealand is that a lot of the healthy, functioning permaculture systems that are kind of champion, food forests and grazing systems with cell grazing and gardens and all these things, they don't really help much with native biodiversity. They do make the landscape more diverse, but because native biodiversity has quite a specific habitat requirement to native bush, and that's really, they're very highly specified to that type of habitat. One of the extra challenges in New Zealand is trying to also provide some space for that habitat and integrating it into your production. That doesn't necessarily need to not be productive, because you can have timber producing or long-term timber producing native trees, and you can have trees that produce fruits or fiber or medicinal uses that can be productive. But I guess the challenge in New Zealand is trying to think about how can we restore and protect native biodiversity while creating these types of sustainable agricultural systems, because just creating food forests and cell grazing and all these more classic approaches to permaculture, in my view, aren't enough by themselves. You do need to look at restoring the native habitat as well and protecting that. So the Zone 3 pasture system, because it's so expansive and dominates much of our agricultural landscape, I think that's the perfect context to start thinking about how we can integrate in the preservation of natural habitat with the function of those systems. That brings us to that last topic, which is the natural habitat. And those two kind of tie in quite nicely together, the Broadacre grazing with restoring natural habitats. I think those two kind of fit well together. So there's Zone 5 there. So I put Zone 4 into silver pasture in that last topic, because in my view, the forestry and the use of productive trees should be kind of integrated into the Zone 3. They should kind of almost go side and side, because of the importance of trees in New Zealand and creating habitats to support native biodiversity. But and also the Zone 5, could be integrated into that Zone 3 too, but because it's often less energy intensive. So the idea of the zones is it's related to energy use. So the Zone 5 would be almost no ongoing energy use from us, other than just maybe removing pests and fencing and replanting. That would be the main activities. Other than that, the idea of Zone 5 is it's more just area for native habitat to live and thrive and have space on the earth to carry out their own lives without much interference from us. And that differs from Zone 4, which is more trees that are being managed by us for production. So for timber, for fodder, for fruit, for nuts, for medicinal plants, for fiber, all of those more actively managed trees would be more part of Zone 4. And then the Zone 5 is more unmanaged wildlife area. So the topics here are more understanding what Zone 5 is. So there's some different resources and ebooks there to explore that. Native biodiversity, so exploring some of the context of New Zealand in particular, because New Zealand was isolated so long, and it's got a very it's got an island fauna and flora that is very isolated from the rest of the world for a long time, so it's very unique. And that also makes it very vulnerable to these new world species that have been introduced for agriculture. They're a lot they've got traits that outcompete the native species very easily. So we've got to think about how to preserve the native biodiversity in the face of all these threats of all these exotic species, and how we kind of manage the impact of these exotic species on to be able to sustainably preserve the environments and the livelihoods of all these native species that we have. Otherwise they'll be lost. So without that kind of management, they would just be overrun by all these native exotic species. There wouldn't be many native species that can compete with them. So again, there's some resources there and some readings to support that, and some links to some websites. And then the last topic, rewilding nature, it's a bit of a global concept, that one, because a lot of, in Northern Hemisphere in particular, they're trying to bring back their megafauna and trying to create a more wild area that has the full range of species that would naturally inhabit those areas, to kind of preserve the form and the function of those natural habitats in their more natural state that wasn't so heavily impacted by us. And in New Zealand, because a lot of those megafauna are now extinct, it's quite hard to do. But there's some ideas there perhaps about how some of them can be brought back, like the moa and the huia and stuff like that. And there's some thoughts there about how to bring back some of those extinct species, because unfortunately for some areas in the world like New Zealand, all that megafauna is now long gone. They all got wiped out in the first waves of humans coming to New Zealand. So it's quite hard to bring back some of those long extinct species. And because the landscapes are now so heavily modified and changed from what they had before humans arrived in New Zealand, some people question whether they should even be brought back, because the habitat no longer is there for them. Although you may argue that some of the New Zealand species could survive quite happily in the habitat that does remain, and if we restore the function and integrity of those natural habitats, they could have a sustainable home in New Zealand. Even some of the bigger moa and things might be able to have viable populations in New Zealand if we did bring them back. That's a bit of a left-wing topic. It doesn't quite relate to preserving native biodiversity as we have it here, but I guess some of the things I've seen is that in ecology, some people get despaired just because of the impact people are having on native ecosystems, and people lose hope a little bit and lose vision, and because they just see all the impacts, the negative impacts we're having, and just lose hope and despair about it. And the rewilding thing is kind of more of a left field kind of big vision. How far can we take it? What if we just be optimistic and positive and really try to take it as far as we can? How can we kind of restore the full function of these natural systems? And so it's quite grandiose and big picture thinking, but these kind of things are potentially possible, and it's good to have kind of big vision pictures about how to kind of do that. And I guess in New Zealand it could be like that 2050 pest predator free New Zealand. That's another kind of really big picture thinking that would be very hard to achieve. But if you don't have these kind of grand big picture ideas, it's kind of hard to inspire people to make change and do things in a grand way. So sometimes we need these kind of bigger visions to drive us to take the actions that we need to make change. So that's the new topics, and the Broadacre one, the Zone 3 Broadacre farm is again exploring some concepts. So if you do have those type of habitat on your farm, coming up with some concept sketches for what that might look like on your farm. And the rewilding one is to come up with a strategy for on your farm or in a neighboring area, what are some strategies that you could do to restore the function and the form and the integrity of those natural habitats, and potentially bring some of that natural habitat into your farm landscape to provide more habitat to support native biodiversity on your farmed landscape. And that's the end of all the topics. So the next month we'll be looking at the design portfolio and exploring how to bring all these topics together and putting it into a portfolio. And then in December, we'll hopefully get some submissions from people to complete the course and get your PDC and sign off on everything. So any questions on any of those other topics that we explored?
Thanks, Richard. This is really, it's kind of exciting. It's a bit daunting in some ways, but it's also kind of exciting to be looking at how to put it all together. I have a comment about Vectorworks, and I guess it looks like a really powerful package. It does look quite complex, and I haven't had the time to be able to sit through and work and understand how it all works, which, to be honest, I've been a bit disappointed by, because I know from what you've said, it's pretty significant to have the student accessibility. And I guess, from a practical point of view, if I'd known in the beginning of this that we'd have a wonderful software package to work with, I would have been able to maybe allocate the time ahead so that I could have that lead-in learning time set aside. So I feel like that's something that I'm a bit disappointed by, that I haven't been able to incorporate and learn. But it is, for me, I don't know about for other students, so quite a significant learning undertaking just to get my head around that software and the Google Maps and everything. So I've sort of vacillated between doing hand drawings, which has been fun and creative, and struggling with different software packages and learning how to best do my design. And so at the moment, my portfolio has a mix of all of those, a mix of software designs, online, basic free software. Sometimes I've done things by hand. I mean, is that acceptable? Or is that, do you want to really see some software mastery?
No, not at all. Yeah, it was just kind of thrown in just because the opportunity was presented to have access to it.
Sure,
so,
and it's a wonderful opportunity.
Late in the day. But yeah, because it's definitely like a course on its own, just to be able to master that software. And it's only really relevant, if you are going to do it professionally, and because there is such a big learning curve, the return on that investment of learning it all would only be achieved if you did it more professionally, and you did multiple properties, and you had a platform there that would then make doing multiple designs more efficient, because you've got the tools there to be able to create your planting diagrams that you like, and replicate them in different areas. So then all that, the effort to learn it pays off, if you're putting it into that context. But for most people on this course, the only real benefit I'd say would be the topography, because it's really hard to visualize and incorporate into a functional design. If you've got even a 10-acre farm, it's really hard to think about how topography impacts your design, and to put that onto a 2D drawing. It's quite hard to kind of capture all that topography. So I think
it is.
One thing with it is that it is a nice tool just to be able to have next to you, or even to print off, so when you're doing your drawings, hand drawings, you can just see what the topography is doing, and have that as reference for when you're doing your design, and just to be able to say in more confidence, this is how the water is going to behave on this property and how it would impact my design. So that's probably only the main function that people might want to explore, and that video that I've posted would get you to that point. And it took me ages to get to that point. That's quite hard to kind of integrate all those platforms to get to that point, because Vectorworks isn't really set up for it either, but it allows you to kind of visualize it quite nicely. But I will say one thing, and this will be maybe an even easier solution if you didn't want to worry about Vectorworks at all, is that let me see. on Google Earth. Oh, I've got the wrong computer, sorry. Yeah, on Google Earth Pro, if you look up your site and you click that middle mouse wheel, you hold it down and you just rotate it around, it will put you in a 3D view in Google Earth and allow you to rotate that view around in Google Earth. So even that is quite a powerful platform to be able to visualize what the topography is doing on your site. And I was actually surprised by how detailed it was on Google Earth Pro. I hadn't really explored it fully previously, but if you go through all of the steps that I outlined in Vectorworks to get to that point of having a topography map, it would be a little bit more detailed, but it would only achieve the same purpose of allowing you to do that exact same thing that Google Earth Pro allows you to do at just typing in your address and hitting the enter button. So probably, you know, that's all you really need to do is just have a look at the topography on Google Earth Pro.
Yeah, okay, because I did start going through the Vectorworks software, and to be honest, it was a bit overwhelming. And I would say that I'm somewhat computer savvy. Maybe it was also just the time with everything else going on as well. And realistically, I don't see me being able to come to grips with that. But yes, I can certainly see for people who are going to be offering a design service professionally, to have that could be extraordinarily powerful.
Yeah, and some people in the course are pursuing those kind of career ambitions, and I think out of all the software that I've looked at, it is the best one by far. It's the only one that's specifically adapted to landscape dynamics, because you can get SketchUp and you can get Illustrator, which are the other good ones, but they can't you can't like say this is a pathway, I'll expand it out that and it will give you the cost of the pathway and it will create a spreadsheet with the costing, or do that with cutting and filling earthworks or fences or stuff. So it recognizes elements that are specific to landscape design, like irrigation and all those things, and it allows you to manipulate those elements specifically as landscape areas. Whereas SketchUp and Illustrator, it will only ever be lines, and you can adapt those lines and you can stretch them and you can make those lines look like fences, but they're not landscape areas that will be able to change the composition and the form of, and change what the fences are at a click of a button, like Vectorworks do. So that's the great advantage of Vectorworks over any other design program.
Definitely, and also to have that cost factor as well, so it brings it into a reality as well.
Free to learn, but expensive to buy. More expensive than the other two.
Thanks.
All right, guys. Well, enjoy your day. Thanks for joining us today, and I'll put up this recording and look at that cell grazing outfit and bulls who supply the infrastructure to support cell grazing, and add that to the recording. Have a good day, guys.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.